Good morning. Welcome to this first day of Cloud Next 23 and this first session post the keynote. Super excited to have so many of you in the audience to talk about identity and access management. This is going to be a power-packed 45 minutes, and I'm going to give you a full whirlwind tour of everything that Google Cloud has for you in terms of identity and access management. Let's quickly get started. As folks are walking in, there are some seats here, but please do settle in really quick. Let's start off by talking about what we are going to cover over the next 45 minutes. I'm going to start off by giving you a sense of some of the trends that we are watching as Google. Now, these trends are based on what customers tell us, what analysts tell us, what's generally happening with the industry, but I'm going to share a few that are of particular interest to Google. I'm going to talk about how that translates into the full stack identity and access management that we have on Google Cloud. We're then going to go deeper and talk about identity, policy intelligence, and some emerging scenarios in the space of identity and access management. I also have some demos towards the end, and I promise to leave some time for Q&A. But if we run over, my team and I, we are sitting in the first row. We are happy to meet you outside the session over a favorite beverage, and we can continue the conversation. With that, let's quickly get started with introductions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around the room, and we're going to come up with 2 truths and a lie. No? Too much pressure to come up with a lie? All right, so let's keep it simple. Let me quickly introduce you to myself. My name is Abhishek Hemrajani. I'm a director of product at Google. My team and I build the identity and access management capabilities on Google Cloud. So let's start off by some key identity and access management trends that we believe all of us should be paying attention to. Starting off with the first one. Now, customers routinely tell us that it is becoming very, very difficult to think about their cloud deployments as secure by default. Now, the good news is, with the advancements in infrastructure as code, policy as code, generative AI, it's starting to become very real to think about self-securing, and as I like to think about them, as self-healing cloud deployments. So the notion of secure by default in the cloud is an important area, and you'll see us invest more in that particular domain. The next one is around just the proper identity and access management space itself. Like, a lot of people talk about how identity systems are legacy, access management capabilities are legacy. Well, the reality is, in the cloud context, building cloud-first identity and access management, privilege access management, account takeover prevention, fine-grained access control, just-in-time access, these are in many ways emerging capabilities, and vendors are starting to build more and more cloud-first, cloud-native technologies in this area. Now, the way I like to think about them is these are not just point solutions. They need to be a set of woven tools that work across your identity and access management capabilities, both from an admin time capability point of view and a runtime capability point of view. So in one of the subsequent sections, I'll go through how I like to think about the spectrum or the continuum of access management capabilities. But the good news is this is an emerging space. So all of us as IAM practitioners, it's a great space to be in. The next one is around just the pure notion of entitlements. Now, there's data that's available that across all of the clouds, 95% principals use less than 3% of the permissions that they've been granted. So all of us in this room are sitting with 97% entitlements on an average that we do not use. Now, that's a problem. It's a problem because we could all become accidental or intentional malicious insiders, or our accounts might get taken over, and it may cause an identity breach. So the notion of entitlement management is becoming super important from an IAM point of view. The fourth one is around just preventing account takeovers, both for human and machine identities. And what that really means is investments in login fraud detection, step-up authentication, and other strategies that can both solve the user experience during the authenticated session, but also prevent any kind of account takeovers. Now, this is an interesting data from Microsoft that over 78% of the Azure AD client base does not have MFA turned on. So even though we are investing in more capabilities in this area, even basic things like MFA aren't turned on. And if you think about how popularly Azure AD gets used, I think that's a huge problem. So we need to get to broader MFA adoption. And then finally, identity is the ultimate threat surface, but it can also be the ultimate control surface. And that's the direction that we want to move the industry towards. So with that, let's quickly start talking about how does this start representing at Google Cloud and what we think about as the full stack Cloud IAM. I'm going to start off by talking about our mission as a company. We are on a path to enable identity-first, AI ML-powered, and policy-based security for your users, for your infra, for your data, and for your applications. So the three things to focus on are identity-first, AI ML-powered, and policy-based. So the subsequent portion of my conversation, this session is going to focus on those exact three areas. What that really translates into is a full stack IAM that can be represented the way it's going to get built out on the screen, starting with the identity platform. So in terms of identity, we have a broad spectrum of capabilities available for you in terms of cloud identity, workforce identity federation, workload identity federation, a very robust certificate management platform, and also for your customer identity management scenarios, the GCIP capability. So from workforce, workload, and CIAM, you have end-to-end capabilities available as part of the Google Identity Platform. Now, if you go a step above that, that's where access management starts coming into the play. And our view of access management is an end-to-end policy-based access control system. And notice I talk about both admin time authorization and runtime authorization. So capabilities like identity governance, things that you do when a new employee joins or on an occasional basis for an audit, that's an admin time capability. Versus giving somebody privileged access approvals at runtime, that's a runtime authorization capability. But notice the spectrum of runtime authorization capabilities is now starting to more prominently feature things like fine-grained access control or account takeover prevention or things like MPA and MFA. And then finally, if you have a robust identity and access management stack, you can then start thinking about differentiated scenarios that IAM lights up for your applications and for your deployments. Scenarios like ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response, but also for your application, the notion of application security or fraud prevention. All of these capabilities require IAM to be robust and to work well with each other. So I see a lot of you have cameras in the air taking a photograph. This is perhaps the most important slide in my conversation today, so I'd urge you to take a photograph. But this is what we're going to talk about over the next few sections. So with that, let's start going deeper. All right, all right. Fantastic. Let's start talking about identity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about two aspects of identity. I'm going to talk about human identities or workforce identity federation, and I'm going to talk about machine identities or workload identity and federation. And if I keep mixing up workforce, workload, I want you all to be in mind meld with me and exactly get what I mean. But I'm going to try not to mess up those two things. So when it comes to workforce authentication scenarios, this is what we hear from customers as yourself. Now, many customers who use GCP today already use Cloud Identity. Cloud Identity offers the capability of synchronizing your existing identity provider. So your users and your groups get synchronized over to Google Cloud, and then you can start managing your Google Cloud services. Now, the feedback that customers have given us over the years is, the first one, customers have extended workforce or partners that they do not want to onboard to their primary identity provider, and occasionally they have a secondary IDP for them, and they want to just, for those specific users, onboard that secondary identity provider without having to synchronize it, without having to go through all of that investment. So that's an extended workforce scenario that we typically didn't have until now. And then the second one is, I'm a net new Google Cloud user. Can I just start by not having to synchronize my IDP? So I use Okta or Azure AD, and I just want to get started with Google, not having to worry about investing in synchronizing or any compliance that comes with it. So those two scenarios. Now, the good news is we've now built and enabled Workload Identity Federation, Workforce Identity Federation, which allows you to achieve exactly that. So you could be a pure play Google Cloud customer today that's using Cloud Identity, which synchronizes your users and your groups from your IDP over to Google, in a sense making them cloud identities. Or you can use the Workforce Identity Federation feature in addition to Cloud Identity. And what that allows you to do is onboard a secondary IDP without having to synchronize it. But the good news is you could start by choosing just to be a Workforce Identity Federation customer, meaning bring your AD, bring your Okta, no need to synchronize anything, no need to worry about compliance or any additional investments. You can get started with Google Cloud in a matter of a few minutes. So in one of my demos, I'm going to actually show you how this new capability of Workforce Identity Federation actually works. In a sense, unlocking those two scenarios, a new customer onboarding without having to synchronize, or an existing customer getting to onboard an extended workforce with Google Cloud. Now, the Workforce Identity Federation feature is designed to leverage your existing identity investments. You simply have your identity provider where your users and your groups and their claims are based. Our tokenization service takes care of all of the authentication and the pass-through, in a sense, enabling access to Google Cloud APIs, the console, and SDK. Seamless experience, and we'll see that in the demo. So in terms of announcements at Next, our Workforce Identity Federation capability now supports 76 Google Cloud services, including important services like GCE. And that coverage is dramatically going to expand over the next few months. And by the end of the year, you should have comprehensive coverage across all of GCP services. And then just in terms of new features, a whole bunch of features on the screen. The one that I want to particularly call out is that the support for authorization code flow when you're using OpenID Connect in terms of setting up that federation. All right, now let's move on and talk about workload authentication scenarios. Now, just as workforce authentication has a few scenarios, machine authentication also can have two prominent scenarios. You may have a scenario where you want to authenticate your workloads to Google Cloud APIs. So your workloads that are running on GCE, on GKE, Cloud Run Serverless, or workloads that are running on-prem or on AWS or Azure, you may want to authenticate them with Google Cloud APIs. Or you may have a scenario when you want to authenticate your workloads with other workloads. So let's say you have a workload running on GKE, and you want to authenticate that workload with a workload that's on-prem using Spiffy. All of these scenarios are already covered by the Google Cloud Workload Identity capabilities for workload authentication. So for example, you could be on GKE, and to authenticate with Google Cloud APIs, you could use GKE Workload Identity. Or you could be on AWS, Azure, or on-prem, and you can use Workload Identity Federation to authenticate with Google Cloud APIs. Now, in terms of coverage for workload authentication scenarios, from service accounts to GKE Workload Identity to Workload Identity Federation and Mesh Identity, we believe we have end-to-end capabilities that are robust, work for a variety of scenarios. A customer was telling me about a scenario where they have a hybrid deployment. These are the options that would work for them today. But we believe that Google has an opportunity to keep innovating in this area. So what you're going to see us is build a unified identity across all environments, which has strong lifecycle management, security, and industry-based nomenclature. So we're going to standardize on Spiffy. So over time, what you're going to see is our entire managed workload identity platform and the notion of a workload identity pool will become unified across all types of scenarios. So if you're authenticating with Google Cloud services for workloads running on Google Cloud or workloads running on non-Google Cloud on-prem or in other clouds, you'll be able to use a consistent workload identity pool backed by a certificate authority service to carry out those scenarios. Now, that's not a super future vision. In fact, this is happening now. So by the end of this year, you'll see us streamline multiple identity types on Google Cloud. We'll start off by streamlining the GKE and Google Cloud workload identity pools. Some announcements on the screen available in terms of the workload authentication area. The one that I'd call for you to pay attention to is the ability for now setting service count key expiration. This is an important feature. It allows you to have better posture and better security related to your workload authentication with service accounts. All right, so that's a high-level view of everything that we're doing in identity. Later today, we have a dedicated session on identity where my team's going to bring Goldman Sachs on the stage and take the theory into the actual practical on how a customer implements some of these capabilities, and I'd strongly encourage you to attend that. Towards the end, I'll have session codes that will give you the understanding of what those sessions are. So with identity out of the way, let's talk about policy-based access control. And as I mentioned, we think about this as admin time and runtime capabilities for access management, all using a unified policy platform. Now, when it comes to policy-based controls, we have three categories of controls. Controls that help you with resource access, controls that help you with resource configuration, and controls that help you with resource boundary. So the example of a resource access control would be a resource-centric policy which helps determine what kind of permission does a principal have against a resource. So an example of that would be, does Abhishek have the ability to create a virtual machine in a project? That's a resource-centric policy or a resource access control. The second class of controls is around resource configurations. This is organization policies and customer organization policies. And what that really talks about is what kind of configurations are allowed or denied so that they can be enforced right when the resource is being created. In a sense, helping you to get towards secure by default. So for example, can I create a bucket with public access? If I have an organization policy that prohibits that, a bucket with such access would never be able to get created. So that's resource configuration. And then there's a third class of emerging controls that we now have, which ensure that you can set guardrails around which organizations can your resources actually deal with. Now, that's a very important control because it can help you in terms of data exfiltration and insider risk scenarios. So you can set organization restrictions to say, my admin cannot even interact with an organization that's not the organization that I have configured for them. So those are controls that are set at the resource boundary. In a sense, between resource access, resource config, and resource boundary, you get defense in depth across your deployment. So let's start talking about Google Cloud IAM. I'm going to talk about the 6 principles that went into when we built Google Cloud IAM, starting with the first one, which is centered around simplicity. We have a universal notion of resource hierarchy in Google, which is Cloud Resource Manager, and a universal identity and access management experience that works across all of the GCP services. Now, that's important because we can all agree identity and access management tends to be a complex area, but it's also an area that you need to really get through quicker so that you can start dealing with deploying infrastructure and applications and managing your workloads in the cloud. So simplicity goes a long way to make it easy for customers to adopt the Google Cloud Platform. The second one is around make identity easy. So everything that I spoke about in terms of workforce identity federation, the options that you now have, use cloud identity or bring your own identity with workforce identity federation, don't have to synchronize them, or use a combination of both, that makes identity easy. So we are no longer mandating an approach that should be used. You can decide what approach works best for you and get to the more important aspects of your cloud deployment. The third one is the ability to right-size roles. Now, this is almost intuitive, but oftentimes not followed. Mapping job functions to the correct roles so that users have exactly the permissions that they need to perform their jobs. But the reality is, all of us have 97% entitlements that we don't use. And that's where access control natively from the platform is super important. So we have capabilities like IAM Role Recommender, which can periodically tell you permissions that you never use, but you're still holding on to them. The next one is around the ability to set context to make an authentication decision. Context such as, what's the security status of my device? What's the IP address that I'm coming from? What's the date and the time? What's the location? These are important attributes that can help make a strong decision around the reputation of the session itself. And then finally, a comprehensive audit trail that allows you to have a deep understanding of when were permissions granted, what privileges were escalated, your ability to attest from a compliance point of view. So these are the 6 principles around which the Google Cloud Identity and Access Management platform was built. Now, I know I spoke about admin time and runtime. So over the next 2 slides, I'm going to take you through a very, very important admin time capability. This is the 3rd time I'm going to say it in this session. 95% of us have 97% permissions that we do not use. We need to start locking those down because that's an identity threat surface waiting to be compromised. So at Google, we have an AI ML-powered capability called IAM Role Recommender that helps you do just that. And we had AI in IAM Role Recommender even before it was cooler to say AI in every sentence. But the way IAM Role Recommender works is, let's say you have a set of permissions that have been granted to you. Over a period of time, you tend to use only a few of those permissions, so maybe you're using half of those. In theory, the administrator should be able to go in and take away the rest of the permissions. Now, what customers tell us is, yes, that makes sense. I should take away the permissions, but I don't know when the user may actually need those permissions. And when they do need the permissions, it can cause a lot of trouble. It can hamper productivity. So how do you take away the permissions that the user will never need, but still leave behind permissions that they may need, even if they have not used? And that's where the AI ML aspect of the IAM Role Recommender comes in. We are able to look at your usage in the past 90 days at a user level, but then also look at data at a broader organization level to make predictions on permissions that may get used even if they were not used over the last 90 days. What that allows you to do is right-size permissions in the most effective manner. In a sense, enabling least privilege with least effort. So your recommendations are based on 90 days data. We leverage AI and ML to make the right size recommendation. We also recommend roles that are going to be the best roles for the particular role to be fine-tuned to. And the best part, you don't need any configuration or any setup to use the IAM Role Recommender. So takeaway number one from this session is, if you haven't looked at IAM Role Recommender in Google Cloud, I'd encourage you to check it out. It's a pretty cool feature. It works by default. And it can really tell you stuff that you don't need in there in terms of permission across your user base. So that's admin time authorization enabled with entitlement management on IAM Role Recommender. Now, when it comes to runtime authorization capabilities, this is a spectrum of capabilities. Now, unfortunately, the way we've all traditionally implemented these capabilities is that we tend to implement them in silos, and we need to start moving away from that. All of the identity and access management systems need to talk to each other, because when an identity threat is in progress, that telemetry that's unified across IAM is what can help you protect your IAM systems and your cloud deployments. So in terms of just-in-time and privileged access, you may wonder if Google Cloud has privileged access management natively. We already do have capabilities that can help you set up what kind of roles need additional entitlements, what kind of users need additional entitlements, can there be a requester, can there be an approver. Over time, what you'll see us do is build that even more natively into the platform. Right now, it's available as a capability that you run on Cloud Run in your targeted deployment. You'll see this become a more native platform capability in the coming months. Or you can do something like a time-based condition in an IAM policy, which allows you to enable break glass access for an administrator. So let's say somebody needs access to troubleshoot a production issue, but if you use a time-based condition, that access can be revoked within a few hours. That way, the user is not sitting with permission that they don't need after the production issue is over. The other aspect is around multi-factor authentication. So if you're a cloud identity user, you have a variety of methods available for your second factor. You can use backup codes, you can use the Authenticator app, you can use the Google prompt, and you can use security keys as we do at Google. If you're onboarding your third-party identity provider using the Workforce Identity Federation feature, we will honor the MFA setting in that identity provider as well. So if you are one of those 22% Azure AD users that are using MFA, we will honor the MFA. But the reality is that MFA adoption needs to get better. The next one is around fine-grained access. Now, the way I think about fine-grained access is, you can think about access at a resource hierarchy getting finer. So can somebody get access at an org level, at a folder level, at a project level, at a resource level? You can do that with IAM policy. So I can go and get access directly at a virtual machine or at a project where that virtual machine is based. So that's fineness in terms of resource hierarchy. But there's also the notion of fine-grained access in terms of data. So am I allowed to query data that is already classified as PII? So with capabilities available in BigQuery and Spanner, you can already do that today. So both in terms of resource and data, you have fine-grained access capabilities available. And then the final one is account takeover prevention, where you'll see a lot more activity from us. Currently in cloud identity, you can go and configure the session length after which a session gets re-authenticated by the system itself. What we are now working on is for select sensitive actions, you'll be able to configure policies which force a re-authentication on the principal. So let's say somebody is trying to download a service account key. That's a sensitive action. And if a user is trying to carry out that action, even if they're authenticated and there were no other risk indicators, because you have a policy in place which says every time somebody tries to download a service account key, force them to re-authenticate so that there is no cookie theft or account takeover risk, we'll be able to honor that intent. So across runtime authorization capabilities, I would strongly encourage you to look at just-in-time privileged access, MFA, fine-grained access control, and finally, the account takeover prevention capabilities built into the GCP platform. All right, so that's policy. Let's quickly talk about policy intelligence, and then we'll talk about some of the emerging scenarios in this space. Now, when it comes to policies, somebody was asking me yesterday when they looked at this diagram, they were like, Abhishek, where does it start and where does it end? The reality is it starts only on day one. When you create your policies for the first time, it never ends. Because that's how posture is. You need to constantly keep evolving and fine-tuning your posture to make it more robust. So you can design your policies using our recommender capabilities. But over time, as you deploy them, you need to be sure that this deployment is not going to break something. This is another feedback that we hear from customers, that I know I need to roll out this control, but I'm afraid, literally that usage, I'm afraid to roll out the control because I don't know what's going to break. So you have capabilities like dry run and simulator as part of policy intelligence that can look at data over the last 90 days or longer and can tell you if this change were to roll out, this is what you're looking at in terms of breakage. So either account for it ahead of time or revisit how you've defined the control. And then more importantly, you don't just stop there. You're constantly analyzing, doing what-if analysis to figure out, am I constantly meeting compliance? Am I taking away permissions that people don't need? And that's the analyzer capability. So it's a continuum of policy intelligence from recommender, simulator, and analyzer. And that's available natively in the IAM platform. And I'll show you a demo of that. So in terms of policy and policy intelligence, here are the set of announcements that are of interest. A new control, which talks about organization restrictions, helps you to ensure that you can prevent data exfiltration due to any kind of phishing or insider attacks within your organization. In a sense, what organization boundary do you want to set for your principals? And then you can now achieve greater control on your organization policies with custom constraints embedded into your organization policy, and I'll show you a demo of that. And in terms of policy intelligence, the ability to do custom policy simulator and dry run is now in public preview. And then show of hands, how many of you are already using IAM deny? Few. It's important that you start using IAM deny. It's a very, very important control now available in GCP. But as you roll out IAM deny, you also need to be able to troubleshoot access issues because of IAM deny. So policy intelligence capability for troubleshooting access issues for IAM deny is now available in public preview. All right, one final section, and then demos, and then Q&A. So in terms of emerging scenarios, now one thing I mentioned in the beginning is that identity is the ultimate threat surface. It is also the ultimate control surface. So one area where directionally a lot of investment is happening is identity threat detection and response. We've already started making these capabilities available in the Security Command Center. So if you use event threat detection in Security Command Center, you can get curated rules for identity-related events. So let's say you have a dormant account getting used all of a sudden, or anybody trying to grant anomalous access to somebody. These kind of events using user analytics will get surfaced in Security Command Center. You have built-in custom detections and also playbooks currently for Google Cloud Identity in SCC. Over time, you'll see us expand this for Workforce Identity Federation and other scenarios. In a sense, you can get findings in SCC which basically tell you you have problems related to how your identities are getting used. Now, if you remember when we spoke about entitlement management, we said that's an admin time activity, right? If we are all taking care of those permissions ahead of time, we wouldn't really have an identity issue. But the reality is no prevention is 100%. So you need a runtime catch. And that's what identity threat detection and response does. Real-time or near real-time, can I surface a finding for you when it looks like something is malicious with how your identities are getting used? And that's what this feature allows you to do. So I would encourage you to check this out in Security Command Center Premium. Over time, this is going to enhance more. All right, let's quickly look at some demos. So just like we did with the session, we started off by talking about identity. We spoke about policy and access control, and then we spoke about policy intelligence. We'll do the exact same thing in these 3 next demos. We're going to start off by looking at Workforce Identity Federation and the new method of onboarding Azure AD or Okta as a sync-less identity provider in your system. So what you're seeing in this demo is the new Workforce Identity Federation capability. This is going to start rolling out to your systems in the next few weeks. I can start off by creating a pool. When I create a pool, I need to provide it a name. So I'm going to call my pool primary Azure AD pool. Once the pool gets created, it says 2 minutes, but that's the magic of demos. I can fast forward. So in this case, the pool gets created fairly quickly. I can then start configuring my provider. So what you're seeing in the screen is me configuring my Azure AD tenant to work in that pool. So I provide the issuer URL, the assertion claims, the secret. I can then specify how does the attribute schema map between my source IDP and Google. So in this case, I'm basically asserting how do the subject and how do the groups translate with each other. I click continue and submit. And what that's going to do is create my pool. It's going to create my provider. I'll execute a few commands on the Azure AD side. And from that point on, I'll be able to use Azure AD in a sync-less manner to access Google Cloud services. It is actually as simple as that. So this is the new Workforce Identity Federation configuration UI, and it's going to start rolling out to you to your deployments in the next few weeks. And it's going to show up under IAM, right under Workload Identity Federation. So that's how you onboard your third-party identity provider without having to synchronize it. The next demo that I have on the screen is, let's say you have a resource-centric policy that takes care of certain behavior that the resources shouldn't follow. So for example, in GCS, Google Cloud Storage, you have a canned policy or an inbuilt policy which enforces public access prevention. That means that these buckets cannot be publicly accessed. And if this policy is enabled at a project level, it applies to all buckets in that project. Now, you may have scenarios where you do want a few buckets to have public access. And the only way that you achieve that right now is you actually move those buckets to a different project, and you don't apply the policy on the other project, and that's how you achieve the separation between. And that's not really useful. It's actually pretty cumbersome to have to create a different project just to apply a policy a different way. So in this demo, what you'll see is I have the canned enforce public access prevention policy that's available in every account. I can now add a custom constraint or a custom policy within the org policy itself. What this one says is that if I have a resource tagged as allow public access, yes, this could be whatever tag you want to use. In my case, I said, if I ever have a resource which says allow public access, yes, override the policy. So here I have 2 buckets, confidential images and public images. Currently, notice tags are empty for both of them. I try to load the public access, and it won't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the buckets view, and I'm going to add that tag to the public access bucket. And this is using the new secure tags capability that's available in IAM. So I'm going to specify allow public access, yes. I click save. It goes through in a few seconds. The tag should start showing up on that screen. Let's go load that bucket again. And hopefully this time, the image will load. There you have it. So this allows you to configure your organization policies with custom constraints, and more importantly, use capabilities like resource tags, which are ACLed in a very robust manner to really have the posture that you need and not have to create multiple projects just to have different policies apply against your bucket. So this is also available now. So this is customizing policies with resource tags. And then finally, we spoke about policy intelligence and the importance of IAM deny. So IAM deny, if it's applicable within your organization, or if a principal has an IAM deny policy configured against them, and if they don't see the right access, typically they're like usually confused, why am I not seeing this access? So now you can use the policy intelligence troubleshooter to really figure out why a principal is not getting the access that they think that they should have. So back in our GCS storage view, you'll see my create option for creating a new bucket is currently grayed out, so I'm not able to create a bucket. If I hover over it, it tells me that maybe you have an IAM deny that's blocking you, go talk to your administrator and have them figure out why you don't have access. So with segregation of duties in play, you would create a ticket for your administrator. Previously, your administrator would look at a bunch of policies and try to troubleshoot it. Now what they can do is they can go run a report for your principal and for the permission that you expect to see. Within a matter of a few seconds, the report comes back and says, your principal was right in that they did have allow for them, but we wrote a deny policy on top of it, which explicitly said, in this case, it says for me, you're not allowed to create a bucket, and that's why deny trumps allow, and the access is not going through. But just the ability to troubleshoot that access issue, you can imagine IAM deny is an important control, but when you roll out a control, along with it comes toil and more work for people. But if you have capabilities like these, you can roll out the control in a risk-free manner, but then also have ability to support your principals when they run into access issues and give them the right information on what's really happening. This capability is also now in public preview, available in Policy Intelligence right under IAM. All right, with that, I am through with the planned content, well within time. We have 9 minutes for Q&A. Before we get to Q&A, I'm going to encourage you to take a screenshot or take a photograph of this particular slide. 2 sessions that I strongly recommend later today. Security 201, which is about defining security baseline. So my team is going to walk you through policy-based investments, a targeted policy section from this session, and they'll have Snap and Box on stage with them. And then Security 300, which is going to go deeper into the identity area, and the team's going to have Goldman Sachs with them on stage. So all of the stuff that I gave you, the theory, the customers are going to tell you how they actually implement it, and there might be some great learnings for all of us as a community.